Hello, welcome back. This week in physics, we're going to be examining light and color. What is color, how we perceive it, how we work with it. And it's an interesting topic because as we're going to see, our perception of color is as much a function of our biology as it is physics, perhaps more so biology. So let's get going and let's talk about the origins of color. Well, what we commonly refer to white light, that is the light coming from a very bright and warm object like the sun or a bulb. What we refer to white light is actually made up of a mixture of all the different colors. Now, the individual credited with first discovering this is my dear old dead ancestor, Isaac. Isaac Newton passed a beam of white light through a glass prism. And what he saw coming out the other side, it was all the colors of the rainbow. And the colors always present themselves in the same order. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, the colors of the visible spectrum. Now, why they present themselves in this order, we'll examine in another lecture later on, a couple of weeks from now. But it's not just these visible colors that are actually made up of light, make up light. Later, we discovered that there were other wavelengths of light that we can't directly perceive, like infrared and ultraviolet, also mixed into the sunlight. This effect of taking white light and being able to split it into its components, this effect is known as dispersion. Okay. So why is it this mixture and what's creating it? Well, that has to do with the temperature of the object making the light. Our sun actually emits the full spectrum of all wavelengths. Here I have a chart known as a black body spectrum. The red line here on the graph represents the distribution of light as emitted by the sun or an object at the temperature of 5700, that's 5700 Kelvin. That's actually a little cooler than our sun. But you'll notice that we go from very short wavelengths, that down here, these would be gamma and X-rays, and very little of those. The red line is very close to zero there. It peaks in the visible spectrum. And then as you get lower than visible light, this would be infrared, and then microwaves, and eventually radio waves. You see it's getting much lower. So the bulk of the light is in the visible spectrum. Now, I'd like to play around with this a little bit more, so I'll have a link to this app simulation on the website as well. But let's give it a moment. So here's that same simulation live, and right now the temperature is set for our temperature of our sun, which is 5800 degrees Kelvin, and you see the spectrum has shifted a little bit. So here's the peak. It's in the yellow-green area. Now, this white star up here represents the shade of white light that we perceive coming from our sun. Now, if you ever bought bulbs, sometimes you'll buy a light bulb and they'll have a temperature rating. Now, that's not actually the physical temperature of the bulb. It's the temperature that they're trying to simulate as far as the light they're creating. So a pure daylight bulb would be creating the same mixture of light that the sun produces at 5800 Kelvin. But we have the ability to actually play around with this. If I lower the temperature, a couple of things happen. First, if I lower the temperature, you'll see that the peak of the light shifts more towards the red side. And it might be hard to tell from your computer monitor, but the shade of this white star up here has actually also shifted and is looking a little dingy, a little yellowy. And that makes sense because I've shifted my spectrum towards the red. If I raise the temperature, representing, say, a warmer star, well, first you'll see that the peak starts shifting towards the blue. A very hot star like Sirius produces a lot more blue light, and that mixture of all the colors would have a bluish tinge to it. All right, but let's get back. So the main idea here is the temperature of the object shifts where the spectrum peaks. But all hot objects emit the full spectrum of light. And again, this is known as the black body radiation. But let's get back to the presentation. All right, so the sun is emitting all different colors of light. But it turns out that we cannot actually perceive directly all wavelengths of light. We perceive the world through our senses, which are biological in nature. We see the world, we see light using our eyes. Now, we are not human recording devices. When we see the world, it's not as the world is, it's the image our brains present to us. So let's take a look at the process of vision. Well, our bodies are based on water, our cells are filled with water, our eyes are filled with water, and so it turns out that the visible spectrum easily passes through water. So it makes sense that we evolved to be sensitive to visible light. So the eye consists of many different parts. Later on, we'll talk about how the lens of our eye helps to focus the light. But the part that does the direct sensing of light is the retina, a very thin layer of cells on the back of the eye connected to the optic nerve. So we want to take a look at how our retina is translating this visual information of the light coming into our eyes and sending it to the brain. All right, on our retina, we have actually special cells that are sensitive to light. So what you're looking at here is an electron microscope image of cells on a retina. And there's lots of interesting features here. First off, notice all this spongy tissue. Vision is an incredibly complex process requiring lots of oxygen, lots of energy. So your retina is made up of very porous tissue to allow maximum blood flow to the cells of the retina, these sensory cells. Now, the sensory cells are two different, you'll notice that there are two different shapes. First, you have these cells which look like columns, these long, tall cylinders. These are known as your rod cells. Your rod cells are sensitive to light and dark. They're not perceiving color. They just perceive that when an object is bright, when an object is dim. If you have difficulty seeing under low light conditions, it's something it is most likely due to a condition of your rod cells. Perhaps you don't have enough, perhaps they're not developed a certain way, but our light and dark vision is a function of the rod cells. But you'll notice that there's another type of cell here too. They look like husks of corn. Now, these cells are known as your cone cells. But we have three types of cone cells. That is, our cone cells are only sensitive. We have a type of cone cell sensitive to red light, a type of cone cell sensitive to green light, and a type of cone cell sensitive to blue light. Our cells are not evenly sensitive to all parts of the spectrum. They're specialized. So we perceive the world, although white light is made up of all the colors, Roy G. Biv, of the visual spectrum. As far as our eyes are concerned, we're only sensitive to the red part, blue part, and green part. All the other colors is our brain interpreting as some mixture of the red, the green, and the blue. In fact, the computer monitor you're using right now can only create red, blue, and green dots of light. Those dots are just so tiny and so small, without a microscope, you wouldn't be able to see them. The computer knows how to use different mixtures of red, blue, and green light to make whatever color it's trying to present. But again, it's an illusion. Our brain is manufacturing that image. So our brain is taking the light cues from these cone cells and telling us what color to see. Now, some people don't have all three types of cone cells. If you're missing one type of cone cell, then you have a condition which we refer to as color blindness. Now, there are more than one type of color blindness, but let's take a look at one type. So being colorblind results from missing one or more type of cone cell. A colorblind view of the world is very different than from what we call a normal eye. So here is a picture of a produce aisle. Now on the left here, you'll see here is a color that the image perceived by a normal eye, and we see lots of reds and yellows and greens, a whole mixture of color. To the right is the same picture as the same view of the protostyle, but taking it with someone who's suffering from color blindness. Now, in this particular version of color blindness, it looks like they're missing the cell that senses red light. And so you see what we perceive as oranges and yellows, the colorblind eye is perceiving as different shades of green. Now, color blindness is one different way of seeing the world, but we need to be clear here. What we call normal, there's no such thing as a single normal view of the world, because we're biological organisms. Everybody's eye is different. Because everybody's eyes are unique, that is, we all have different mixtures of cone cells, different types of cone cells, no two human beings are going to see the world the same way. Our view of the world is a picture constructed by the brain, and no two people have the same eyes or the same brain, and so no two people will see the world exactly the same. All right, let's summarize where we are right now. So our eyes are only sensitive to red, green, and blue light. All other colors are perceived as some mixture of these three colors. So we refer to these three colors as primary. Red, blue, and green are the primary colors. Now, in art class, you may have learned different sets of primary colors. That's because in art class, you're generally not mixing actual light. You're mixing paints, which are a function of pigments. Now, theater people are used to using colored spots, and so they might be more familiar with this from stagecraft. But notice that where these three colors overlap, I see different colors. Now, again, I cannot stress enough, your computer monitor is only actually making red light, blue light, and green light. What I see as an overlap in color is simply that it's making the red and the blue light dots glow very close to each other. What I see here then is these mixtures of primary colors are known as the secondary colors. So if I mix an equal amount of red and green light, I perceive the color yellow. If I mix an equal amount of green and blue light, I perceive cyan. If I mix an equal amount of red and blue light, I perceive the color magenta. Yellow, magenta, and cyan are known as secondary colors. Now, it's interesting to note that there is no magenta in the visible spectrum. That physically, there is no magenta in Roy G. Biv. Magenta is a color that we perceive because our brains are translating the red and the blue light together and telling us that it is this color called magenta. So again, I doubt two human beings are seeing the exact same color of magenta. You'll also notice that periodically we're mixing three colors of light. If I mix an equal amount of red, green, and blue, I see white. And again, your computer screen is not capable of making white light. Your computer screen is generating red, blue, and green dots. So in the middle of this figure, the red, blue, and green are turned up equally, and my eye perceives white. Also, if I mix yellow, magenta, and cyan light, I also perceive white. All right, so bring it all together, we perceive all other colors as a mixture of red, green, and blue. Roy G. Biv is physics. White light is made up of all those different wavelengths. But as far as our human beings are concerned, we interpret that light as a mixture of red, green, and blue. Our eyes are sensitive to red, green, and blue light because we have three types of cone cells, which is why we talk about three primary colors. If we evolved on a planet where we had four types of cone cells, we'd be talking about four primary colors. If we evolved on a planet where we had two types of cone cells, we'd be talking about two primary colors. But our eyes are designed around three types of cone cells, sensitive to red, blue, and green. We call those colors the primary colors. Secondary colors are created by mixing equal intensities of the primary colors. So if I mix red and green together, I see yellow. If I mix blue and green light together, I see cyan. If I mix red and blue light together, I see magenta. White light is created by mixing equal intensities of the three primary colors. Red plus green plus blue will give me white. Or three secondary colors. yellow plus cyan plus magenta will also be perceived as white. What we call black is the absence of color, or the absence of light. Black itself is not light. It's light that has been completely absorbed. So the absence of all light is perceived as black. A pair of colors that mix together, then combine to create white, we call that pair complementary. So for example, if I mix red and cyan, I will perceive white. Now why is that? Well, that's because remember, to our eyes, cyan is really a mixture of blue and green. So if I take cyan light and red light, my brain is actually combining red, blue, and green together, and that makes white. Similarly, if I take green and magenta, I will see white. Because again, our eyes perceive magenta as a mixture of red and blue light. So green plus red plus blue, three primary colors again, I will see white. Blue and yellow will make white. Yellow is a mixture of red and green light. If I add in the blue light, I will perceive white. Any other colors besides these three primary and three secondary, say the orange of the text on this display, or the colors of my face, or any other color I wish to make? Well, we create those colors by mixing an unequal amount of light. For example, this orange text. This yellow text is being created by an equal amount of red and green light being generated by the pixels of the computer screen. However, if I turn down the green and turn up the red a little bit, I will shift and my eyes will perceive an orange color. Again, it's not making orange light. If I could physically measure the wavelengths coming off the computer monitor, I would see there's only red and green light coming off underneath this orange text. But my eyes perceive it as orange. All right, let's do some practice. Bear with me as I try to activate the pen. All right, first question. I have white light that is passed through a yellow filter and then a cyan filter. What color is the remaining light? There we go. All right. White light is really made up of all the colors of the spectrum, Roy G. Biv. However, as we've covered, that I'm only actually seeing this as a mixture of red, blue, and green light. So I'm going to replace the white light and represent it as a mixture of the three primary colors: red, blue, and green. Because again, that is how my eye is perceiving white light. It's triggering my red cells, my blue cells, and my green cells. All right, I'm going to pass this red light through a yellow filter. All right, well, if I have a filter that looks yellow to me, the reason why it looks yellow is because it's only letting through the colors red and green. Because red and green make up yellow light. So when this white light made up of red, blue, and green strikes this yellow filter, it's not going to let the blue light through. So the blue light ray gets absorbed. The red light ray continues on through, and the green ray continues on through. And then I'm going to strike a cyan filter. Well, again, if it looks cyan to me, that means it must be letting through blue and green light. Well, red's not blue or green, so that means that this filter is going to X out the red light, and the only color that comes through is the green. So if I take white light and pass it through a yellow and cyan filter, I will end up seeing green light coming through. All right, the second example. Yellow light is passed through a magenta filter and then a cyan filter. What color is the remaining light? Well, I'm not starting with white now, so I'm not going to use red, blue, and green. I'm starting with yellow. So yellow light is going to be an equal mixture of red light and green light. And I'm going to pass it first through a magenta filter. Well, again, a magenta filter looks magenta because it lets through red and blue light. Well, green's not red or blue, so the green light gets X'd out and the red light comes through. It's then going to hit a cyan filter. A cyan filter looks cyan because it lets through blue and green light. Red's not blue or green, so the red gets X'd out. So everything gets absorbed. Well, if I take yellow light and pass it through a magenta and cyan filter, nothing will make it through. What I'm going to see then is black. All the light's been absorbed. Okay? All right, so we've been looking at what happens when mixing light. But what about if I wanted, and we've been talking a little bit about how computer screens use red, blue, and green light to create these colors that we perceive. But what about printed pictures? How does that work? Well, let's take a look.